Hello, this is Kubernetes SIG Testing. It's the meeting on Tuesday, January 30th. This meeting will be recorded and posted on YouTube shortly afterwards if I have figured out how to do all that correctly. I've put the meeting notes in the chat. I guess one thing that I just wanted to start off with was just a quick debrief for our co-working day last Friday. First thing, huge thanks to Matt and the EKS team for hosting us in the building. That was really cool. Thank you guys for feeding us as well. But I guess I wanted to open up questions like thoughts in the day. Did we think it went well? Are there things that we think we could improve on? Do we want to continue investing in more of these days in the future? Anybody have opinions on this?
I thought it was great. And yeah, I definitely would second the opinion that thanks, Matt and EKS. I thought you guys were great hosts. And I thought it was pretty, it was good to meet everybody in person. And I thought it was useful to hash out some things. And I would be interested in continuing them and eventually, getting to the point maybe where, it doesn't necessarily have to be I feel like, this was sort of mostly a lot about like meetings and strategy and whatnot, but I'd also be interested in, maybe if there's, something that you and me or you and Cole or whatever are working on that, that we could bang away a PR, have it be more of a typical workday as opposed to like a strategy session if we continue on a regular basis. But yeah, I think it's, really good to see, a bunch of different companies, people from those companies getting together and working together.
Yeah, definitely mirrors a lot of my thoughts. Matt, did you have anything on the host end that you wanted to share?
Not really. I mean, it was really informative for us. You guys gave me a pretty good brain dump to get me kind of caught up on the state of things. I would be more than willing to participate again and host again at some point in the future. I don't know if I can convince my manager to let me host twice in a row, but yeah. So I think the one thing I would say is maybe a little bit stronger of an agenda, particularly if we want to kind of do maybe a little bit of a meeting time, followed up with like an hour or two of like breakout time where you go into the small groups and actually hack away on code, and then come back in for another meeting and then break out again. Might help kind of silo those, like these three people want to achieve A and these two people are going to go work on this other thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so definitely if we do one of these in the future, maybe a little bit more structure to it, seems like a good feedback. Did you have any other feedback like from the host end on things that would have made your life easier, or?
No, I think everything went well from my side. Yeah, I had the numbers ahead of time, so there wasn't really an issue with food or anything like that. So.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Did anybody else have any feedback? Okay, it doesn't look like Tim is here, but maybe Maru can fill us in. The other thing I wanted to bring up today was just a super quick blip about the testing commons. I saw an invite went out on the final meeting time, but I figured it would be good just to blast it out if that had been decided on. Maru, do you know about that?
We're meeting bi-weekly, so not this week, but next week. And the meeting time is super early for PST people, 7:30 a.m. in order to accommodate people in the UK.
Okay, awesome.
And since it's only me in the West Coast, that's fine. If we start getting more people participating in the West Coast, then I think maybe we'll have to find a different time, because that's, for most people, that's pretty ridiculous. I may be an exception.
Right. Cool. So if anybody's interested in that, next week on Wednesday, 7:30 PST would be the time to be in this Zoom account.
I've linked to our agenda for that.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
I think it is, yeah, the same meeting.
Okay, awesome. The next thing on the agenda from Justin was about reserved instances in the CNCF account. Doesn't look like he's actually in the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was something we briefly mentioned, and we talked about on Friday a little bit, right, about how that might help with some flakiness or something, because sometimes spot instances are sold out for a period of time, or I guess non-reserved instances. I don't know, Matt, if you have any thoughts or recommendations or whatever.
Yeah, I think we just need to sit down and look at, what level we should reserve in each availability zone. I know there's also some work on adding more availability zones to testing. I think prior, maybe even right now still, there were only 3 zones being used. So, if we spread it out across all of them, how many do we want to reserve in each zone? But it's something, I don't know, we probably want to take that offline and actually do some work there, gather data.
Yeah, we should be able to get a pretty good idea of general job throughput by looking at the GCS buckets and when jobs are running. Okay, so if we don't have any other stuff we wanted to hash out on that one, I guess, Maru, you've got the floor. Talk about third-party integration testing.
So this is sort of an outcome of one of the discussions we had last week's meeting. When you're, say, trying to test Federation as an example, but the new frameworks repo basically just wraps a binary. So you have to go and source the binaries and download them. And then you're running maybe not a representative, like you're running in a way that maybe you wouldn't run in production. And the idea was, well, maybe we want to actually run containers and be able to use like an official image for whatever thing we're testing with. And the question was, is CI going to be willing to support that, either via Docker and Docker, or actually letting us actually run pods with those containers? I think the pods question is maybe a security concern, or if we can't run containers, we can run binaries, but I figure we'd raise the question before we went further. Any ideas, thoughts?
So this is third-party end-to-end testing, and the question is, would the pods running those tests be allowed to interact with the cluster they're in?
That would be, yeah. So if I want, the simplest example is I'm Federation and I want to run a Kubernetes API server. I want to run etcd. Is it possible that I use containers to run those things, just like you would in production? And if so, could I actually run a pod on the cluster that's running the test that runs my server that I'm interacting with? Technically possible, maybe not realistic, depending on security concerns. Unless we could whitelist. My thinking was maybe it's viable if we were to whitelist images. It'd be like if it's a published Kubernetes image and we have a list of those are whitelisted. You can't run any arbitrary pod with arbitrary containers, but you can run ones that we know are good. And that's the most likely test target, to be honest, is like running Kubernetes API server or controllers or something like that.
How is this different from what we're doing right now?
This is for integration testing, and this is for things like, say, Federation. We're not having like the things that we're going to be testing in tree, so we have to get them from somewhere. We have to pull an image or pull a binary or something from some other place and then boot up an environment that we can run tests against.
Okay.
So when you define your prow job, your prow pod, couldn't you make that a sidecar container? And would that solve the problem?
How would we'd actually have to change the prow configuration whenever we updated the test target. And we would have, I would say if we had multiple supported versions, we would have, release. I think it's mostly okay for release versions. I'm, I guess, more concerned about development versions. Like release versions would be really stable. It's like, oh, you're testing against, Cube 192, define that in the prow job and only bump it when, a new release comes out. But if I'm doing against a development environment, I don't know if that would work. And maybe like that either suggests having something that varies according to like the latest CI target, or you just use a binary that
What's wrong with using a binary?
Nothing wrong with using it. There was just there's concern expressed that it's like, well, who actually is going to run a binary versus running a container? It's just a little bit less realistic. There's no reason we can't do it. It was just the closer we can get to something that's, oh, so maybe it doesn't matter in CI. It was more for uniformity across local versus CI. Like, it's more convenient to source an image and run a container if you're running locally than having to download a binary and maintain that binary. Or like keep it up to date versus give me the latest container. So maybe it's a less of a question about CI. It's like, if we can do containers in CI, then that would be preferable, just to keep things the same when you're doing things locally.
I mean, so we're already doing a container, but I would actually say that you maybe don't want to make everything the exact same environment, because we've run into problems in Kubernetes where things suddenly become extremely dependent on the environment they're running in, and that makes the test more brittle. And then when you try to change things in the future, it just breaks because now it's made all these assumptions about it.
But this is kind of like, it's not a primary testing. Like, this isn't intended to test Kubernetes. It's intended to test like integration with Kubernetes. So I'm not sure that's as much of a concern.
Should be able to just run a binary in CI and provide a similar-ish image for running locally. I mean, for example, right now we have all the Bootstrap nonsense that you probably don't want locally. So we wouldn't do exactly the same image. Like the Bazel build jobs, right? You can use Planter locally if you want, but it's not the exact same image. It just keeps all the tooling and things that actually matter in sync.
Mm-hmm.
I would hesitate to use something like Docker and Docker just to keep them similar, because there's no reason we can't just have a top-level container that's similar. And I don't see why we need to set the container at runtime.
As opposed to?
As opposed to just like building or checking out a binary from somewhere that's being used in the local images.
Oh, you mean in CI? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So don't use containers in CI, use them locally for convenience. Is that the suggestion?
To me, I still don't understand why I mean, if this is for integration, I guess how I would imagine doing that is, if I have repo A, which produces image A, and repo B, which produces image B, I would maybe have some, system which is constantly publishing the latest A and the latest B. And then for my integration test, I would define a proud job that has 2 containers, or maybe 3 containers, and have a sidecar container which, pulls the latest of A and starts the job for that, and the latest of B, which starts for that, and then my test can just point at those. And I guess it's not clear to me how well that would or would not work, or how that's different from what you're envisioning. But it seems like containers seems like a good idea. But I guess my instinct would be to try and have the container specification be static, so that we could just check that into the job, and then maybe have the image change as the state of the image. Rather than having the job start containers, just have the sidecar containers be part of the specification of the job.
Right. So in a simple example, if I wanted to validate like aggregation against like Kube API, I would need like an etcd container or a Kube API container, and then I guess I would have to run my own thing as a binary, but that's fine. Like, I'm doing the stuff that I don't own as a container, and then I'll run my own stuff as binaries because I'm going to be building them right there. To me that seems viable. It would mean
is it a concern that like etcd is going to be updating frequently and you don't want to have to change?
No, not so much that. I just need, really etcd is not something that, anybody but Kubernetes should really care about. Like,
right.
Compatibility with Kubernetes, then I should assume that I can use it for my out-of-street thing. It's mainly like the version of Kube. I'd want to make sure that it was stable, probably.
Actually,
right. But I feel like that would be, like right now, how we have like the latest green dot. We have like write these files that we upload into GCS, which say like latest green dot text. And so that's how we determine like what to check out for our CI jobs. But it might be useful to sort of publish a cube image, which is like, latest unit test passing version of cube.
I'm realizing though, and sorry, Ben, you have something to say. I'll wait. You seem concerned there for a second. Maybe something else?
Our Zoom just flicked here, but I was going to say that I think Steve actually has put in something, at least for the moment, that actually artificially restricts Prow containers or Prow jobs to one container related to having sidecar logging. I'm not sure how we want to handle that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the architecture of you've got 7 containers in your pod. I'm not sure we have a clear and consistent story right now about where are we getting artifacts from, how are the logs being presented to you after the fact.
Okay.
I feel like those are all solvable problems.
Yeah, definitely solvable. Is there any worry that like, I guess the complexity involved in setting up all the different components, like using like a productized Kubernetes installer to, are you worried that having, all of these things orchestrated as different containers within one pod is going to give you a system that is representative of an actual cluster? And are you worried about the complexity cost of actually having that set up in your job?
I don't think the goal is to have like a full cluster. It's mainly like, at least not initially, it's mainly just on the API level. Like once we're at a tree, we need an API server that we can aggregate against and validate against. And it just seemed hokey to like have to download binaries versus being able to say, just use this container and it just runs via container runtime. Like I said, it's kind of less of a concern for CI. I was just like, well, if we're going to do it one way locally, why not just do it that same way or similar way everywhere? And it sounds viable. The only thing that's maybe a problem in my mind is how we manage configuration for the API server. Like if we're running it as a pod and we're setting some degree of configuration, would it be possible to like how could we dynamically change the configuration, I guess is the question. To set like aggregation, like
I mean, sharing a volume between your main test container and the API server container could, if you want to do config management from inside of your job.
Like I know you can configure aggregation via flags. I'm just thinking like, is there a different way to do that? I know you can use like config map based stuff for some components. I'm not sure about the API server. This may be going off in the weeds, so if someone knows, please.
I mean, I would definitely add that it is also 100% possible to do Docker and Docker if we need it. It's just that adds its own needs and mess, and like Kubernetes already does a pretty good job managing containers for you. So if we can stick to just like you have a job container, I don't know if it's worth it if you're going to have like 7 or 8 containers or something.
7 or 8 seems excessive.
Especially since if you're going to have to connect these together locally, if you're using like a volume or something in CI, that's not going to be exactly the same as how you run it locally either.
Right. Yeah, I guess maybe I should put more thought into what the configuration requirements are and how that could be implemented. If it was just an API server you're just using and you don't have to change the configuration, that's one thing. But if we have to vary the configuration, then it sounds like it'd be Docker or binaries. So I'll do some more looking.
Yeah, I mean, the immediate response to having a more complicated surface there with a config map or whatever, I think we'd have to think very carefully about how Prow would expose that API to jobs and how we would, I don't know, would we have a namespace per Prow job, or like, how are we not? It's pretty far outside of the current scope of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is really kind of exploratory. Like the first like things out of Tree that are going to start wanting to do this is maybe cluster registry, federation. But I don't imagine, I think this is something that is going to be increasingly common, and around the testing, like the new frameworks repo, the goal is to just have something that someone could create a new API and they could actually just reuse this infrastructure. So all that to say that, like, I don't really have all the answers. I'm just like, part of this is a thought exercise to start people thinking about, like, how do we actually make this easier for people versus having to just do it bespoke per API server.
Yeah, and for what it's worth in Origin, like our effort right now for projects that are trying to integrate is just to let them loose and have start up an entire cluster. And that's pretty heavyweight, but it does kind of smooth over some of the ranks here.
It's fine in CI, but I want to avoid
yeah,
that.
No, not yeah, that doesn't seem reasonable.
I would add that, somewhat tangentially related, don't want to go too deep into it, but Quinton's had some more progress, hopefully, on finishing upstreaming the local nested Docker and Docker cluster. And at some point, we'll want to do that in CI. And that certainly solves integration by just here's a fake cluster. But like Steve said, if you don't really need it, that might be a little heavyweight.
And I guess there's something that I'm not sure actually where it went. I'd be interested to know, is that actually published somewhere?
Yeah, it's a PR in Kubernetes right now.
Okay.
Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I can send you the link if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. And there's the guy from Huawei was working on sort of more lightweight framework for getting apps testing up and running, and it just uses hollow nodes, doesn't use real nodes. But
yeah. So I'd be interested to see the size of the surface area of our non-provider, so our conformance tests that can be run with the hollow nodes. That would be very interesting to me.
I can find you a link to the PR, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer questions.
Perfect.
Cool. Last item on our agenda today, Eric talking about the branch protector.
Yeah, so I sent an email to Contribex and SIG Testing about this yesterday, but we actually have the branch protector running, and it should be configuring repos on a daily basis. And I am intending to extend that to the community repo and then sort of see about getting it set up for the whole org. And so, yeah.
And generally, that just has feature parity with the Munger previously, right?
Right. So yeah, it'll right there. It'll also yes, exactly. So you can specify what things are, and then it'll make sure that those contexts are required. But yeah, that's what the Munger does.
The branch protection job, though, has the nice feature of figuring out a lot of the jobs itself. Like it can determine which crowd jobs are required and require those automatically.
Okay, cool. With 50 seconds to go, it looks like we've gone through the whole agenda. Were there any other items that anybody wanted to bring up?
Pre-submit Jenkins is dead. CI Jenkins is dying soon.
Ooh, yay! That's pretty awesome. I'm very excited. I wore my Jenkins shirt to celebrate. Hopefully set on fire in a celebratory manner, maybe a KubeCon or something.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming.